ABC General Hospital spoilers reveal that the evolving connection between Isaiah and Liz has quickly emerged as one of the most emotionally resonant dynamics within General Hospital. Not because it's filled with dramatic declarations or chaotic twists, at least not at first, but because it offered a rare glimpse into healing, possibility, and emotional maturity for two individuals long burdened by pain. Liz, whose life has been punctuated by heartache, betrayal, and countless personal tragedies, began to discover in Isaiah something she hadn't known in years: quiet safety. He didn't try to overpower her world or demand her attention, he simply showed up. In the hospital's sterile corridors. They shared long shifts, late-night conversations, and unspoken understanding. Isaiah's calm logic balanced Liz's emotional depth, and gradually, trust began to grow, not the reckless trust that comes from desperation, but the kind built slowly through patience and empathy. Isaiah, for his part, found in Liz a kindred spirit who understood the emotional demands of working in a place where every decision could mean life or death. He admired her compassion, her strength, her ability to carry the weight of so much grief and still show up for others. Their friendship was grounded in subtle gestures and mutual respect, and before long, it began to evolve into something more, a bond neither of them could deny nor clearly define. But just as this emotionally healthy relationship began to gain momentum, it attracted attention. And with that attention came a dangerous disruption: Rick. Rick's re-entry into Liz's life was never going to be smooth. Their history is layered with manipulation, deception, and a dangerous blend of obsession and control. Despite being absent from Liz's world for some time, Rick had never truly let go. Whether out of jealousy, unresolved desire, or a pathological need to control her narrative, Rick took notice of Liz's growing closeness to Isaiah, and he didn't like what he saw. For Rick, Liz's happiness has always been something to possess or destroy depending on his proximity to it. And as he watched her smile in Isaiah's presence, he began plotting. Rick's weapon of choice wasn't violence or emotional blackmail, at least not initially. It was information. Digging through Isaiah's past, Rick discovered a truth that had been carefully concealed. What Isaiah had built in Port Charles, the identity he had established, was now vulnerable to exposure. Rick, calculating as ever, chose the moment to strike with precision. At a hospital board meeting, or perhaps in a hushed hallway with just enough ears listening, Rick let it slip: Isaiah wasn't who he claimed to be. He had a past, a different name. Possibly even an old affiliation with government secrets, black ops medicine, or a scandal that never made it to public light. Whatever it was, Rick framed it not just as a reveal, but as a betrayal. The reaction was immediate. Liz, blindsided, struggled to separate truth from manipulation. Her instinct was to defend Isaiah, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Could she trust that he was telling her everything? Had he ever intended to share this part of himself with her? And most importantly, was his past dangerous, not just to her heart, but to her family, her children, and her already fragile world? Isaiah, thrust into the center of chaos he'd spent his entire life trying to avoid, didn't respond with excuses or denial. Instead, he stood his ground. Not trying to erase the past but hoping Liz could understand the man he had become. He explained what he could, kept certain details sealed for reasons of safety or legality, but made one thing clear: his feelings for Liz were real, and he never intended for Rick to weaponize his history. Rick, emboldened by the emotional confusion he had stirred, didn't stop there. He reminded Liz of every time she had been hurt, every man who had deceived her, every time she had opened her heart only to have it crushed under the weight of someone else's lies. He didn't do it out of love. He did it because he wanted to be the voice in her head again, the one who controls her fears, directs her doubts, and ultimately makes her rely on him. The hospital staff, always quick to whisper, began treating Isaiah with guarded eyes. Colleagues questioned whether his credentials were real, whether his past might invite danger into General Hospital. The administration quietly debated whether they could allow someone with a sealed record to continue practicing. Isaiah's once stable world crumbled at the edges, not because of what he had done, but because of the power of perception and Rick's relentless manipulation. Meanwhile, Liz found herself in a psychological tug-of-war. Her instincts told her Rick was playing a dangerous game. But the damage was already done. She began pulling away from Isaiah, not because she no longer cared, but because she feared that getting too close would once again mean dragging her family into someone else's mess. The heartbreak was palpable. Liz wasn't angry, she was exhausted. Exhausted from trusting, from trying to love, from believing that maybe this time, it would be different. As for Isaiah, the revelation of his identity didn't destroy him, it forced him to confront the part of his life he had buried. He could either retreat, vanish as he had once done before, or stand and fight, not just for his career, but for the woman he had come to care about. And so, for the first time, Isaiah chose not to run. He asked Liz to see him for who he truly was, not the man Rick painted, but the man she had come to know in long shifts and quiet conversations. Rick's plan, while successful in sowing discord, may have overplayed its hand. His interference reignited old questions about his motives and past behavior, prompting Ava, who always had her own agenda, to take a closer look at what Rick might really be after. Was this about love, control, or something deeper? Perhaps Rick knew something more about Isaiah's origins, something linked to a larger network of secrets in Port Charles, something he couldn't quite control. In the end, the unraveling of Isaiah and Liz's romance didn't just impact them, it set off a chain reaction. Elizabeth's world, already fraught with emotional landmines, now faced the real possibility of collapse. Her colleagues distanced themselves, her trust eroded, and the hope she had begun to cling to dimmed. But in the rubble lay a choice, whether to let Rick win once more, or to take a chance on the imperfect truth and the man willing to fight for redemption. As this chapter unfolds, one thing becomes clear: the past never truly stays buried in Port Charles. And when secrets resurface, they don't just alter relationships, they rewrite legacies. Isaiah and Liz may yet find their way back to each other, but only if they can both survive the storm Rick has unleashed. Until then, the tension in General Hospital continues to build, and the battle between healing and destruction rages on, with Liz caught in the very heart of it. The story unfolding at General Hospital is teetering on the edge of psychological chaos and emotional devastation as Rick begins his obsessive descent into reclaiming what he believes is rightfully his, Liz. What once was a buried history now claws its way back to the surface in full force, with Rick's dark obsession acting as a catalyst for a chain of unraveling events. His return isn't marked by redemption or remorse. Instead, it's powered by a haunting desire to possess Liz completely, to isolate her, to turn her world inside out until no trace of the life she had been building with Isaiah can survive. This new wave of obsession is not just personal, it is strategic, methodical, and deeply dangerous, revealing that Rick is no longer just a figure from Liz's past but a destabilizing force in her present. What makes Rick's obsession all the more terrifying is how calculated it has become. Unlike the impulsive manipulations of his past, Rick now cloaks his possessiveness beneath the veneer of concern. He frames himself as a protective force, whispering just enough warnings and planting just enough doubts to fracture the foundation Liz was building with Isaiah. His method is subtle, playing on her fears, reminding her of betrayals past, of times she loved and lost, of the emotional toll of trusting the wrong man. And it works. As Rick looms over her shoulder, Liz begins to question everything, especially Isaiah. Then comes the revelation that tears through the hospital like wildfire: Isaiah has a criminal past. Not just a vague mistake or professional misjudgment, but a documented, provable offense, one that is now confirmed and undeniable. It's the kind of truth that doesn't merely wound a reputation, it demolishes it. And Rick ensures the entire hospital staff knows. His timing is precise, his delivery clean. The moment the truth is confirmed, Rick acts not with malice but with performative heartbreak, positioning himself as the man who only wanted to protect Liz from being hurt again. The damage is swift and merciless. Isaiah is suspended pending an internal review. Former allies become silent. The whispers in the hallway evolve into pointed glances. And Liz, caught in the middle, finds herself drowning in doubt, anger, and betrayal. The Isaiah she knew, the man she laughed with, confided in, felt safe around, now seems like a mirage built on lies. She wants to believe in him. But the facts are there, and Rick is always present, feeding the flames of her disillusionment with quiet satisfaction. But Isaiah, unlike others in Liz's past, doesn't vanish. Instead, he owns his past. He confirms that, yes, there was a time when he was someone else, when he made terrible decisions, when desperation led him into ethically murky waters. But he insists that who he was is not who he is now. He explains his actions not to excuse them, but to give them context. He was part of a medical operation overseas. One that involved unauthorized testing on patients during a wartime emergency. It was sanctioned in secret, then buried when the optics turned bad. He took the fall for actions that were morally gray, but which saved lives. Still, he carries the guilt. He came to Port Charles to start over, but Rick, with his relentless need to dominate Liz's heart, is ensuring that Isaiah never gets that chance. Liz is forced into an impossible position. The man she has grown to care for may have committed unethical acts. The man she once loved, Rick, is clearly manipulating the situation. But he has also told her something she can't ignore. As the lines between truth and control blur, Liz begins to lose her grip on who to trust. Her past with Rick tells her to run. But her fear of betrayal tells her to pause with Isaiah. And so she becomes paralyzed, torn between two histories, one dangerous, one unknown. Rick, watching Liz crumble under the weight of his influence, intensifies his grip. He starts isolating her further, calling in favors, reigniting old connections, and subtly threatening anyone who defends Isaiah. His manipulation begins spilling beyond Liz, touching her family, her children, and even her patients. He frames Isaiah's presence as a liability, a risk to hospital safety. At board meetings, he questions whether the hospital should be employing someone with such a record. The result is swift. Isaiah is not just suspended, but blacklisted. At the same time, Rick begins inserting himself back into Liz's life in quiet ways, dropping by with coffee, picking up her kids from school without asking, lingering at her nurse's station long after he should be gone. It becomes clear to those around her that Rick is no longer just an ex, he's becoming a shadow, a presence she can't escape. And Liz, broken down by the unraveling of her relationship with Isaiah and the suffocating pressure Rick is applying, begins to cave. She lets him in. Not out of love, but out of exhaustion. Out of fear. But something deep inside her fights back. Despite the chaos, Liz is not the same woman Rick once manipulated. She sees the difference now, not just between Rick and Isaiah, but between control and choice. She knows that Isaiah, for all his flaws, gave her agency, whereas Rick only ever wanted possession. And that realization sparks something in her, a refusal to be consumed again. Isaiah, in the meantime, has begun digging into Rick's actions. He uncovers patterns of emotional abuse, manipulation, even bribery within the hospital. With the help of a few remaining allies, he compiles evidence that could destroy Rick's credibility. But using it would mean exposing Liz even more, showing the world just how much Rick has infiltrated her life. So Isaiah waits, hoping Liz will choose him before he has to destroy the man trying to erase him. Meanwhile, the hospital becomes a battleground. The tension between Rick and Isaiah is palpable, threatening to explode with every encounter. Staff members take sides, administration is split, and Liz becomes the unwilling center of a power struggle that no longer has anything to do with love. It's about control, legacy, and whether redemption is ever truly possible. And so the story escalates. Rick's obsession becomes more visible, his actions more aggressive. Isaiah's secrets, while real, begin to look less like threats and more like human scars. Liz, once again, stands between two forces, one that seeks to rebuild and one that seeks to possess. As Port Charles watches, the question becomes not just who Liz will choose, but whether she can survive the consequences of either decision. Because this time, the war isn't just for her heart, it's for her freedom. And no matter which way she turns, the shadows of the past are ready to swallow her whole. The story surrounding Isaiah is beginning to fracture beneath the weight of legacy, expectation, and the relentless pull of emotional history. In Port Charles, few names carry as much weight in the realm of heartbreak and redemption as Lucky. His decades-long saga with Elizabeth, marked by passion, betrayal, forgiveness, and enduring emotional residue, has become not only a legend within the hospital halls but an emotional benchmark by which all of Elizabeth's future partners are quietly, perhaps unfairly, measured. And now, Isaiah finds himself caught in that shadow, struggling to define his own identity while unconsciously being pulled into a vortex of comparison, doubt, and emotional displacement. Though Isaiah began his connection with Elizabeth on solid footing, with empathy, professionalism, and integrity, it is becoming more apparent with each passing day that he is fighting a battle far deeper than hospital politics or romantic tension. He is fighting a ghost. The ghost of Lucky, the mythic version constructed over time in Elizabeth's heart and in the eyes of those around her, continues to loom large over everything Isaiah attempts to build. Every word he speaks, every gesture of kindness, every attempt at intimacy is filtered through the lens of whether he matches the emotional gravity and flawed heroism of Lucky. This isn't simply about love, this is about surviving inside someone else's legacy. This burden is not new to Isaiah. From the moment whispers began about his connection to Elizabeth, there were murmurs among the nursing staff, subtle looks from longtime GH doctors, and unspoken expectations that if he were to matter to her, he'd have to live up to something no living man could replicate. But at first, Isaiah believed that sincerity, patience, and transparency could win over hearts, including Elizabeth's. What he didn't anticipate was how deeply embedded Lucky's memory remains, not just in Elizabeth's psyche but in the very structure of the hospital's social environment. It's not simply about winning her heart, it's about dislodging a permanent occupant of it. As Rick begins to re-enter the narrative with his manipulative tactics and quiet psychological warfare, Isaiah finds his footing even more compromised. Rick doesn't just see Isaiah as a rival, he sees him as a placeholder, a weak shadow of the men who came before. Rick uses this, whispering truths and half-truths, all designed to amplify Elizabeth's internal doubts and Isaiah's growing insecurities. And Isaiah, already wrestling with a confirmed past misdeed from his medical career, begins to feel the walls closing in. Rick speaks of legacy, of passion, of true history, as if Isaiah were merely an intermission between epic chapters. This emotional gaslighting begins to take its toll. Isaiah, once confident and centered, begins to spiral. He hesitates at meetings. He second-guesses clinical decisions. His rapport with colleagues begins to fray. Most importantly, he begins to withdraw from Elizabeth, not out of disinterest, but out of fear that his presence in her life is only causing her more pain. Every moment with her becomes a psychological minefield. If he shows strength, he risks seeming aggressive. If he shows vulnerability, he risks appearing weak. In every scenario, he feels as though he is failing not just Elizabeth, but the image of Lucky, who he never even knew, yet whose presence haunts his every interaction. Isaiah tries to confide in Elizabeth, but each time, the words don't come out right. He wants to tell her that he's tired of being measured against someone who abandoned her as often as he loved her. He wants to scream that he doesn't want to be Lucky, he wants to be Isaiah. Someone real, grounded, and present. But those words never come. Instead, he says little, stepping back, allowing space, giving her the very distance that Rick and Lucky never offered, but which, paradoxically, may cause him to lose her. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is caught in her own emotional quagmire. She's not blind to what Isaiah is enduring. She sees the shift, the hesitations, the silences, the careful distance. She knows he's struggling with something, but in her own heart, the echoes of the past make clarity difficult. Lucky was the first love, the unforgettable ache. Rick was the dangerous pull, the destructive obsession. Isaiah, he was supposed to be the calm after the storm, the partner who offered healing. But now, even he feels unstable. Not because of anything he's done, but because the very foundation of their connection is being rattled by ghosts. This emotional instability begins to manifest in Isaiah's private life. He spends long hours in his on-call room, poring over research he's already mastered, revisiting his old journals from the war-zone hospital where he first made the decision that now haunts him. He questions whether he even belongs in Port Charles, whether the fresh start he envisioned is a fiction. The past is inescapable, and the present is shaped by shadows that grow larger each day. Then comes the turning point, an anonymous letter delivered to GH administration, resurrecting Isaiah's past offenses with surgical precision, suggesting he falsified records and performed unauthorized procedures. The content is clearly orchestrated, the tone vindictive, the timing brutal. Though never proven, the letter is enough to trigger an investigation. Isaiah is placed on administrative leave. And just like that, the quiet, steady doctor who once brought hope to Elizabeth's door is reduced to a rumor, an alleged threat, a name that causes conversations to pause when nurses walk by. Elizabeth is devastated but conflicted. She wants to defend Isaiah, but Rick is right there, offering support, telling her he warned her, that some men are good at pretending to be heroes. Rick doesn't need to manipulate her anymore. Isaiah's silence and retreat are doing that for him. Isaiah, in exile, watches the life he built collapse, not from a single fatal error, but from 1,000 paper cuts, every glance, every doubt, every whispered comparison to Lucky, every strategic jab from Rick. The culmination is a man emotionally and professionally paralyzed. Not because he wasn't enough, but because he was never allowed to be himself. This isn't just a story about a failed romance. It's a story about legacy, about the weight of memory. About the way love can become haunted by nostalgia and fantasy. Isaiah never wanted to replace Lucky. He wanted to build something new. But in Port Charles, ghosts don't just linger, they control the narrative. And unless Isaiah can find the strength to reclaim his story, to rise from the weight of inherited expectation and define his own worth outside of Liz, outside of Lucky, and beyond Rick's reach, he will remain a cautionary tale, a man swallowed by a past that was never his to begin with.